The kingdom was alive with energy, a place where history and modernity intertwined seamlessly. Tourists poured in from every corner of the globe, eager to catch a glimpse of its grandeur. The heart of it all was the royal palace, a sprawling masterpiece of golden spires, intricate carvings, and lush gardens that seemed almost too beautiful to be real. Among the throngs of visitors stood Alex, a traveler who had built a reputation for seeking out the extraordinary. Known among friends as someone who always wanted to go beyond the ordinary, Alex carried a backpack filled with maps, cameras, and an insatiable curiosity. Alex stepped off the crowded bus and took a deep breath, marveling at the sheer scale of the palace before them. People milled about, snapping photos and chatting excitedly in different languages. But Alex's eyes were immediately drawn to something else: the royal guards stationed outside the entrance. Clad in crimson uniforms adorned with gold trim, they stood tall and unmoving, like statues carved from discipline itself. Each guard held a gleaming saber at their side, the sunlight catching the polished metal and making it sparkle like a treasure waiting to be claimed. While others admired the architecture or posed for selfies, Alex found themselves captivated by the sabers. There was something magnetic about them. Perhaps it was their elegance, or maybe the air of mystery surrounding their purpose. Were they purely ceremonial, as the guidebook suggested, or did they hold some deeper significance? Alex's mind raced with questions, but there was one thought that kept bubbling to the surface. What would it feel like to hold one? As the tour group moved closer to the gates, Alex lagged behind, unable to tear their gaze away from the guards. One particular guard caught Alex's attention. He stood slightly apart from the others, his posture impeccable, his expression unreadable. His saber hung loosely at his hip, yet there was an aura of readiness about him, as if he could spring into action at any moment. Something about this guard intrigued Alex even more than the weapon itself. Was he truly just standing there for show, or was there more beneath the surface? The guide droned on about the palace's history, pointing out details about the frescoes and fountains, but Alex barely heard a word. Their thoughts were consumed by the scene unfolding right in front of them. The sabers weren't just objects. They felt like symbols of power, tradition, and authority. And Alex couldn't shake the growing urge to see what would happen if they reached out, if only for a second, to touch one. What started as idle curiosity soon turned into something bolder. Alex began formulating a plan, convincing themselves that the guards were likely instructed not to react harshly to tourists' antics. After all, how serious could these ceremonial soldiers really be? Surely, no harm would come from trying. It wasn't theft. It was exploration, discovery, maybe even a bit of fun. As the group paused near the entrance hall, Alex's heart began to race. This was the moment. The chance to do something unforgettable. Little did Alex know, however, that what followed would change everything. And not in the way they expected. As the tour group shuffled through the palace gates, Alex's mind was still fixated on the sabers. The guide, a cheerful woman with a clipboard and a wide-brimmed hat, led the group into a courtyard filled with fountains and statues. She spoke animatedly about the history of the royal guards, explaining how their sabers were not just weapons but symbols of honor passed down through generations. Each blade, she said, had been forged by master artisans who dedicated years to perfecting their craft. Some sabers even bore engravings that told stories of battles fought centuries ago. The other tourists listened intently, nodding along as they snapped photos of the intricate details on display. But Alex wasn't paying attention. Instead, their thoughts kept circling back to the guard near the entrance, the one with the gleaming saber that seemed to call out to them. The guide's words barely registered in Alex's mind, drowned out by an inner voice whispering, "What harm could it do? Just touch it for a second. No one will care." The more Alex thought about it, the more convinced they became that the guards were simply part of the spectacle, like mannequins placed there to enhance the experience. They reasoned that these soldiers probably didn't even carry real weapons. Surely those sabers were replicas meant for show. And if they weren't replicas, then why would anyone leave something so valuable within reach of random strangers? To Alex, this logic made perfect sense. The guards must have been trained to ignore minor disturbances, to maintain their stoic demeanor no matter what happened around them. But there was another layer to Alex's reasoning, one rooted in arrogance rather than curiosity. Having traveled extensively, Alex prided themselves on knowing how things worked in tourist-heavy places. In their mind, rules were flexible, especially when it came to harmless fun. How many times had they seen people break small regulations during tours, like stepping over barriers or touching forbidden artifacts, and gotten away with nothing more than a polite warning? Surely, grabbing a ceremonial saber wouldn't be any different. Still, a tiny voice of doubt lingered at the back of Alex's mind. What if the sabers really were authentic? What if the guards took their role seriously? These fleeting questions were quickly brushed aside. After all, how dangerous could a bunch of ceremonial soldiers be? If anything, Alex figured, attempting to snatch the saber might elicit a chuckle from the guard, an acknowledgement of the playful audacity behind the act. As the tour continued, Alex grew increasingly restless. Every step felt like wasted time, every pause an opportunity slipping away. Their eyes darted constantly toward the guards stationed throughout the grounds, imagining scenarios where they could make their move without drawing too much attention. By now, Alex had forgotten entirely about the rich history being shared by the guide. All that mattered was finding the right moment to act, to prove to themselves that their assumptions were correct. Unbeknownst to Alex, however, the guards weren't just standing idly by, trained to observe everything happening around them. They noticed Alex's distracted behavior long before the attempt began. Captain Rylan, the very guard Alex had been eyeing, exchanged subtle glances with his fellow soldiers, silently communicating their awareness of the situation. While Alex believed they were cleverly planning their next move, the guards were already prepared for whatever might come. And so, as the group approached the grand entrance hall, Alex felt a surge of confidence wash over them. This was it, the perfect chance. With the crowd momentarily distracted by the guide's explanation of the palace frescoes, Alex decided to take action. What they failed to realize, however, was that their understanding of the guard's role was about to be shattered in the most unexpected way possible. The grand entrance hall was a breathtaking sight, with towering marble columns and intricate mosaics covering the floor. Sunlight streamed through stained glass windows, casting colorful patterns that danced across the polished stone. The guide's voice echoed softly as she explained the significance of the hall and royal ceremonies, but Alex wasn't listening. Their focus was entirely on the lone guard standing near the doorway, his saber gleaming under the golden light. Alex's heart pounded as they weighed their options. The crowd had momentarily shifted, clustering closer to the guide to admire one of the frescoes. This created just enough space for Alex to move unnoticed, or so they thought. Taking a deep breath, Alex edged closer to the guard, their pulse racing with a mix of excitement and nervousness. It felt like stepping into forbidden territory, a moment where rules blurred and anything seemed possible. With a quick glance around to ensure no one was watching, Alex made their move. They lunged forward, reaching out with trembling fingers toward the hilt of the saber. Time seemed to slow as their hand hovered inches away from the weapon. For a split second, Alex allowed themselves to imagine the thrill of holding it, the weight of history resting in their palm. But before they could even graze the metal, the guard reacted with a speed that defied belief. Captain Rylan moved like lightning, his training kicking in without hesitation. In one fluid motion, he stepped back, simultaneously drawing the saber from its scabbard. The blade flashed in the sunlight, slicing through the air with a sharp hiss. Alex froze mid-reach, their hand hovering awkwardly in the empty space where the saber had been just moments ago. Gasps erupted from the nearby tourists, who turned in shock to see what was happening. For a brief moment, everything went silent. Alex stood there, wide-eyed and frozen, looking utterly bewildered. The guard, now holding the saber firmly in his grip, regarded Alex with an expression that was neither angry nor amused, just calm and resolute. His piercing gaze locked onto Alex, sending a shiver down their spine. It was clear this wasn't some ceremonial actor playing a role. This was a soldier trained to protect, ready to act at a moment's notice. The other tourists began whispering among themselves, some pointing at Alex while others looked away in discomfort. A few snapped photos, capturing the bizarre scene unfolding before them. One woman muttered something about disrespect, while a man shook his head and muttered, "Tourists these days." The atmosphere shifted instantly, the once joyful tour group now tense and uneasy. Alex finally stumbled backward, raising their hands defensively, as if to signal surrender. "Wait," they stammered, their voice cracking under the weight of embarrassment. I didn't mean anything by it. I thought it was fake." But Captain Ryland didn't respond immediately. Instead, he stood tall, the saber still poised in his hand, exuding an aura of authority that commanded respect. His silence spoke volumes, making Alex feel smaller with each passing second. It was as though the entire room had shrunk, leaving Alex isolated in the spotlight of their own foolishness. Palace officials quickly arrived, alerted by the commotion. They ushered Alex aside, separating them from the stunned tourists. As Alex was led away, they couldn't help but steal one last glance at the guard. Captain Ryland had returned the saber to its scabbard, his composure unshaken. There was no anger in his eyes, only a quiet dignity that left Alex feeling more humiliated than any shouted reprimand ever could. What had started as a reckless impulse had spiraled into something far beyond what Alex had anticipated. They had underestimated the guards, misjudged the situation, and now faced consequences they hadn't even considered. Little did Alex know, this encounter was only the beginning of a journey that would challenge everything they thought they knew, not just about the palace, but about themselves. The wait to meet Queen Illyra felt like an eternity. Alex sat on a simple wooden bench in the antechamber, their mind racing with thoughts of what might happen next. The room was quiet except for the faint hum of activity drifting in from other parts of the palace. Sunlight filtered through narrow windows, casting long shadows across the stone floor. Every tick of the clock seemed louder than the last, amplifying Alex's anxiety. Finally, a servant arrived and gestured for Alex to follow. They were led down a series of grand hallways, each more ornate than the last, until they reached a pair of towering oak doors. With a gentle push, the doors swung open to reveal the royal library, a vast chamber filled with towering shelves lined with ancient books. The air smelled of parchment and polished wood, and sunlight streamed through stained glass windows, bathing the room in soft hues of blue, green, and gold. At the center of the room stood Queen Illyra, a striking figure dressed in flowing robes adorned with subtle embroidery. Her presence was both commanding and calming, as if she carried the weight of her crown with grace rather than burden. She turned to face Alex, her piercing eyes locking onto theirs with an intensity that made it impossible to look away. "Come closer," she said softly, her voice warm yet firm. Alex hesitated for a moment before stepping forward, their heart pounding. To their surprise, the queen didn't begin with accusations or reprimands. Instead, she gestured toward a nearby table, where several artifacts lay displayed. Old maps, faded letters, and a single saber resting atop a velvet cloth. "This saber," the queen began, picking it up gently, "belonged to my great-grandfather. He wielded it in defense of our kingdom during one of its darkest hours. It is not merely a weapon. It is a symbol of sacrifice, loyalty, and resilience." She paused, allowing her words to sink in before continuing. "Every guard who carries a saber today does so not just because of tradition, but because they embody those same values." Alex listened intently, their earlier defensiveness melting away under the queen's steady gaze. For the first time, they saw the sabers not as shiny objects meant to impress tourists, but as living pieces of history, imbued with meaning far beyond their gleaming surfaces. The queen placed the saber back on the table and turned to face Alex fully. "Tell me," she said, her tone thoughtful, "why did you think it was acceptable to reach for something so sacred without understanding its significance?" Alex hesitated, searching for the right words. I guess I thought it didn't matter," they admitted quietly. "I saw the guards standing there and assumed they weren't really protecting anything important. I let my curiosity get the better of me, and I didn't stop to think about how disrespectful it was." The queen nodded slowly, as if expecting this response. "Curiosity is not a flaw," she said kindly. "It drives exploration, learning, and growth. But when curiosity blinds us to respect, for people, for traditions, for boundaries, it becomes dangerous. You must learn to balance your desire for adventure with an awareness of the world around you." She gestured toward the artifacts on the table. "These items tell stories, stories of triumphs, losses, and lessons learned. They remind us of who we are and where we come from. When you dismissed the saber as fake, you dismissed the story it holds, and the sacrifices made to preserve it." Her words struck a chord deep within Alex. They had always prided themselves on being adventurous and bold, but now they realized how reckless they had been. The queen wasn't scolding them. She was teaching them, offering a chance to grow instead of simply punishing their mistake. As the conversation continued, Alex found themselves opening up in ways they hadn't expected. They shared stories of their travels, their love for discovering new places, and their occasional tendency to act impulsively. The queen listened patiently, nodding occasionally and asking thoughtful questions. By the end of their talk, Alex felt a strange sense of relief, as though a heavy weight had been lifted off their shoulders. Before dismissing them, the queen offered one final piece of advice. "Respect is the foundation of all relationships, with others, with cultures, and with history. Carry that with you wherever you go." As Alex left the library, they couldn't help but feel change. The shame of their earlier actions still lingered, but it was accompanied by a newfound determination to understand the world more deeply. Little did they know, this meeting with the queen was only the beginning of a journey that would challenge them in ways they never imagined. Alex was ushered into a small, dimly lit chamber just off the main hall, their face flushed with a mix of embarrassment and anxiety. The room was sparsely decorated, with stone walls and a single wooden table in the center. Two palace officials stood nearby, their expressions stern but not unkind. Captain Ryland followed silently, his presence commanding even without the saber in hand. For a moment, no one spoke. The weight of what had just happened hung heavily in the air. Finally, one of the officials broke the silence. "Do you understand the seriousness of your actions?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. Alex shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact. They opened their mouth to respond but hesitated, unsure of what to say. How could they explain something they barely understood themselves? It had all seemed so harmless in their mind, a fleeting impulse driven by curiosity. But now it felt reckless, disrespectful even. I didn't mean any harm," Alex stammered, their voice trembling slightly. "I thought the saber was fake, like part of a display or something. I wasn't trying to steal it. I just wanted to see what it felt like." The official exchanged a glance with Captain Ryland, who remained silent, his arms crossed over his chest. There was no judgment in his gaze, only a quiet patience that somehow made Alex feel worse. Another official stepped forward, her tone softer but still authoritative. "These sabers are not props," she explained. "They are symbols of our kingdom's history and the honor of those who carry them. To disrespect the saber is to disrespect everything it represents." Alex swallowed hard, the reality of their mistake sinking in deeper with each word. They had been so focused on their own excitement that they hadn't stopped to consider the meaning behind the weapon, or the people entrusted with protecting it. Now, surrounded by these serious faces, Alex realized how selfish and thoughtless their actions had been. Captain Ryland finally spoke, his deep voice cutting through the tension. "You assumed we were actors," he said, his tone measured but pointed. "That because we stand here quietly, we are not serious about our duty. But tell me this. If someone tried to take something important from you, something you valued deeply, would you simply let them?" Alex looked down at their shoes, unable to meet his gaze. The question hit home, forcing them to confront the arrogance of their earlier assumptions. Of course, they wouldn't stand idly by if someone tried to take something precious from them. Why should they expect anything less from the guards? The officials conferred briefly in low voices before turning back to Alex. One of them cleared his throat and said, "Normally, such behavior would result in severe consequences. However, given the circumstances, and your apparent remorse, we will allow Queen Alira to decide your fate." At the mention of the Queen, Alex's stomach dropped. Meeting royalty was the last thing they needed right now. What would she think of someone who had acted so foolishly in her palace? Would she demand punishment or worse, banishment from the kingdom? Panic began to creep in as Alex imagined endless scenarios, none of them favorable. Before they could spiral further into dread, Captain Ryland stepped closer, his expression softening ever so slightly. "This is your chance to learn," he said simply. "Do not waste it." With that, Alex was escorted out of the chamber and taken to wait for an audience with the Queen. As they sat alone in a quiet antechamber, their mind raced. They replayed the events of the day over and over, cringing at every misstep. The thrill of adventure that had brought them here now felt hollow, replaced by shame and regret. Yet amidst the turmoil, there was also a flicker of hope. If the Queen was willing to hear them out, perhaps this disaster could lead to something meaningful. A lesson learned, a perspective changed. For the first time since arriving at the palace, Alex began to see beyond their own desires. This wasn't just about a silly attempt to grab a shiny object. It was about understanding respect, tradition, and the weight of history. And though they couldn't yet see it clearly, this confrontation marked the beginning of a transformation, one that would leave them forever changed. Next morning, Alex was summoned to the palace training grounds, a vast open courtyard surrounded by high stone walls where the royal guards practiced their drills. The air buzzed with energy as soldiers moved in synchronized formations, their sabers flashing in the sunlight. Captain Ryland stood at the center of it all, his commanding presence impossible to ignore. When Alex arrived, escorted by a palace official, the captain turned to face them, his expression unreadable. "This is your penance," the official explained before stepping aside. "You will spend 1 week training alongside the guards. It will be difficult, but it is an opportunity to learn and make amends." Alex swallowed hard, glancing nervously at the guards who were already eyeing them with a mix of curiosity and skepticism. They had imagined some form of punishment, perhaps writing lines or performing menial tasks. But this was entirely unexpected and intimidating. Captain Ryland gestured for Alex to join him. "If you're here, you'll do things our way," he said firmly. "No shortcuts, no excuses. Understand?" Alex nodded quickly, though their stomach churned with apprehension. The first task was simple enough, or so it seemed. Learning how to stand like a guard. "Posture matters," Ryland instructed, demonstrating the proper stance. Feet shoulder-width apart, back straight, chin slightly raised. Alex mimicked the position, wobbling awkwardly as muscles they didn't know they had began to protest. It wasn't long before Alex realized that standing still was harder than it looked. Minutes felt like hours as sweat trickled down their forehead under the relentless sun. Just when they thought they couldn't hold the pose any longer, Ryland barked. Again. And so it went. Hour after hour, day after day. By the second day, Alex was introduced to the basics of handling a saber. At first, the weapon felt foreign and unwieldy in their hands, nothing like the sleek prop they'd imagined during their ill-fated grab. Under Ryland's watchful eye, they learned how to grip it properly, how to move without losing balance, and how to swing it without looking foolish. Each movement required precision and control, qualities Alex quickly discovered they lacked. You're holding it too tightly, Rylan corrected during one session. A saber isn't just brute force. It's an extension of your body. Relax your grip. Alex tried again, fumbling but determined. Every mistake earned a sharp critique, but also quiet encouragement. Slowly, painfully, they began to improve. What started as clumsy swings evolved into something resembling technique. By the end of the third day, Alex managed to execute a basic strike pattern without dropping the saber, a small victory, but one that filled them with pride. As the days passed, Alex found themselves growing more attuned to the rhythm of the training. They woke early each morning, sore and tired, yet eager to prove themselves. The other guards, initially distant, began to warm up to Alex's efforts. Some even offered tips or shared stories about their own struggles when they first joined the ranks. One evening, after a particularly grueling session, Rylan approached Alex as they sat on the ground, catching their breath. "Not bad," he admitted gruffly. "For someone who started off thinking we were actors." Alex chuckled nervously. "I guess I deserved that." Rylan smirked faintly. "You did. But you've come a long way. Remember why you're here, not just to train, but to understand what these sabers mean. Honor, discipline, sacrifice." Those words stayed with Alex long after the sun set. As they drifted off to sleep each night, exhausted but fulfilled, they reflected on everything they'd learned. The sabers weren't just weapons. They were symbols of a legacy upheld by those willing to dedicate their lives to protecting it. And while Alex might never fully master the art of wielding one, they now understood the weight it carried, the responsibility behind every polished blade. By the final day of training, Alex could hold their own in a basic drill, moving in sync with the others. Though far from perfect, they had earned the respect of the guards, and most importantly, themselves. As Captain Rylan dismissed them with a rare smile, Alex knew this experience would stay with them forever, shaping not only how they viewed the palace, but how they approached life itself. The week of training had transformed Alex in ways they never expected. What began as a punishment turned into a journey of self-discovery, discipline, and newfound respect for the guards and their traditions. On the final day, Captain Rylan led Alex back to the palace library, where Queen Elira awaited. This time, however, the atmosphere was different, less tense, more hopeful. Queen Elira greeted them with a warm smile, her eyes reflecting pride rather than judgment. "Captain Rylan tells me you've worked hard this past week," she said, motioning for Alex to sit across from her at the large wooden table. "I trust you've learned something valuable." Alex nodded earnestly, their voice steady despite lingering nerves. "More than I ever imagined," they replied. "I thought the sabers were just objects, but now I understand what they represent. The history, the sacrifices, the honor. And I'm so sorry for not seeing that before." The Queen's expression softened further. "Apologies are important, but actions speak louder. You've shown humility by embracing your penance and learning from it. That is what matters most." She then reached into a small chest beside her and pulled out a token, a miniature replica of a ceremonial saber mounted on a polished wooden base. It gleamed faintly under the sunlight streaming through the stained glass windows. Handing it to Alex, she explained, "This is a reminder, not only of the lessons you've learned here, but also of the respect we hope you'll carry forward in all your travels." Alex accepted the gift with trembling hands, overwhelmed by its significance. "Thank you," they said quietly, their voice thick with emotion. "I promise I won't forget." As the meeting concluded, Captain Rylan stepped forward. For the first time since their encounter, his demeanor wasn't stern. It was almost friendly. "You've earned our respect," he said simply. "Not many people would have endured what you did without complaint. Use what you've learned wisely." Over the following days, as Alex prepared to leave the kingdom, they found themselves reflecting deeply on everything that had happened. The once arrogant traveler who had dismissed the guards as mere actors was gone, replaced by someone humbled and changed. They spent hours writing letters to friends and family, sharing stories of the palace, the training, and the profound impact it had on them. Each word carried a sense of gratitude for the Queen's mercy, for Ryland's guidance, and for the opportunity to grow. Months later, news of Alex's transformation reached the palace. In addition to writing heartfelt articles about responsible tourism, Alex began giving talks at travel conferences, urging others to approach new cultures with respect and understanding. Their speeches often included anecdotes from their time at the palace, highlighting the importance of learning before acting and appreciating the deeper meanings behind traditions. One evening, as Alex sat in their apartment drafting another article, a letter arrived bearing the royal seal. Opening it carefully, they read Captain Ryland's words, "We are proud of the person you've become. Your actions here may seem small, but they ripple outward, touching lives far beyond our walls. Carry this legacy with you always." Tears welled up in Alex's eyes as they reread the note. Though thousands of miles separated them from the palace, the bond forged during that unforgettable week remained strong. The Saber replica sat proudly on their desk, a constant reminder of the mistakes made and the lessons learned. Alex realized then that forgiveness isn't just about absolving guilt. It's about creating space for growth. The kindness shown to them by the Queen and the guards had planted a seed, one that would continue to bloom in every corner of the world Alex explored. From that moment on, they vowed to honor not only the memory of the palace, but also the spirit of respect and humility it instilled in them. Months had passed since Alex's departure from the kingdom, but the lessons they carried with them continued to shape their life in profound ways. Back home, surrounded by familiar streets and faces, Alex found themselves seeing the world through a new lens. The reckless adventurer who once sought thrills without considering consequences was gone, replaced by someone thoughtful, reflective, and deeply aware of the impact their actions could have on others. Alex threw themselves into advocacy work, using their platform as a traveler to promote responsible tourism. They wrote articles, gave interviews, and spoke at events, urging people to approach unfamiliar cultures with curiosity tempered by respect. "It's not enough to just visit a place," Alex often said during talks. "You have to listen, learn, and honor the traditions that make each destination unique." Their words resonated with audiences, inspiring countless travelers to rethink how they interacted with the world around them. One of Alex's most popular pieces was an article titled, "The Saber That Changed My Life." In it, they recounted every detail of their misadventure at the palace, the foolish attempt to grab the saber, the humbling week spent training with the guards, and the wisdom shared by Queen Illyra. Readers were captivated by the story's honesty and vulnerability. Many reached out to thank Alex for reminding them of the importance of cultural sensitivity, while others shared their own experiences of learning hard lessons while traveling. But Alex didn't stop there. Determined to give back, they collaborated with organizations focused on preserving heritage sites and supporting local communities affected by tourism. Whether volunteering at workshops or fundraising for conservation projects, Alex poured their energy into making a positive difference. It wasn't about erasing past mistakes. It was about creating a legacy rooted in growth and understanding. Back in the kingdom, Captain Ryland and his fellow guards occasionally discussed Alex's journey. Word of their advocacy efforts had spread even to the palace, where Queen Illyra herself expressed pride in how far Alex had come. "They've taken what they learned here and shared it with the world," she remarked during a council meeting. "That is proof that second chances can lead to meaningful change." Meanwhile, Alex kept the miniature Saber replica prominently displayed in their workspace, a silent yet powerful reminder of the transformation they had undergone. On tough days, when self-doubt crept in, they would glance at it and remember the discipline, humility, and resilience they had discovered within themselves. It wasn't just a trinket. It was a symbol of redemption, a testament to the idea that mistakes, no matter how embarrassing, could become stepping stones towards something greater. Years later, Alex returned to the kingdom, not as a tourist, but as an honored guest invited to speak at a cultural symposium hosted by the royal family. Walking through the palace gates once again, they felt a mix of nostalgia and awe. So much had changed since their first visit, both in the kingdom and within themselves. As they stood before an audience that included Queen Illyria, Captain Rylan, and many of the guards who had trained them, Alex delivered a heartfelt speech. "I came here thinking I knew everything," they began, their voice steady and sincere. "I left knowing how little I truly understood. This place taught me that respect isn't passive. It's active, intentional, and lifelong. And because of that lesson, I've been able to share your kingdom's values with the world." When the applause died down, Queen Illyria rose from her seat and approached Alex with a warm smile. "You've honored us," she said softly, placing a hand on their shoulder. "Not by perfection, but by growth. That is the mark of true character." As Alex left the palace grounds later that evening, they paused to look back one last time. The golden spires glimmered under the setting sun, casting long shadows across the cobblestone paths. Though miles separated them from this magical place, its influence would always be with them, a guiding light in their ongoing journey to explore the world responsibly and respectfully. In the end, Alex realized that the real treasure hadn't been the saber they tried to snatch. It was the relationships forged, the lessons learned, and the ripple effect of kindness and forgiveness. Those were the things worth carrying forward, shaping not only their own story, but the stories of countless others touched by their message.